are live.
It's 5:05 and welcome in to a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. The Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, the 45th and 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, spent his afternoon yesterday at Fort Bragg addressing a packed crowd of military members and other guests as he spent that time honoring the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary. The president greeted Fort Bragg by commending the service members in attendance and celebrating 250 years of valor, glory, and triumph. Ahead of his comments, which took place around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the president received multiple demonstrations and got to take in some of the amazing military might of Fort Bragg. That took place about an hour or so beforehand. He was not alone at the event. He was also joined by the U.S. Defense Secretary and Pete Hegseth and Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, who, as we talked about earlier this year, is a North Carolina native and also an alumni of UNC Chapel Hill. This is how the president opened his comments yesterday afternoon.
This week we honor 250 years of valor and glory and triumph by the greatest fighting force ever to walk the face of the earth, the United States Army. For 2.5 centuries, our soldiers have marched into the raging fires of battle and obliterated America's enemies. There's never been anything like it. There's never been a force like this.
Never been a force like the United States Army, according to President Donald Trump. Again, that visit highlighting the 250th anniversary of the armed forces. The president commenting on that.
But for the American people, there's no greater pride because you are the righteous sword of American justice and the ultimate shield of American freedom. This week we remember that we only have a country because we first had an army. The army was first. In fact, the army was even before the country. You know that, right? 1 year before the country. After 250 years, we still proudly declare that we are free because you are strong. You are so strong. We're safe because you are brave, and America's flag will never fall because America's army will never, ever fail. Never going to fail. Every branch of the armed forces has played a critical role in protecting our nation, but no one has done more fighting, bleeding, and winning than the U.S. Army. Nobody's done that. The Army has earned more combat medals and more battle ribbons than any other service, and 70% of all of the medals of honor. We give away medals of honor all the time at the White House to incredibly brave people, but you have 70% of them. Army soldiers, and especially our Army paratroopers, truly go all the way. You know that expression, all the way. It's one of your beautiful expressions. As President of the United States, let me express my undying gratitude to our nation for every soldier here today, for every veteran and their families, those incredible families that are with us and all across America, and for every patriot who has worn the uniform over 250 years. Can you imagine that? We thank you from the absolute bottom of our hearts.
And when you look at Fort Bragg, it is the largest military base in the world by population, with about more than 52,000 military personnel. And the facility is very large, over 250 square miles. You look at some of the history of Fort Bragg. It was originally called Camp Bragg, established back in 1918 as an artillery training ground. That would, of course, be during World War I when Fort Bragg first began as Camp Bragg. The president also commenting on some of the history of this amazing military installation.
This is the home of the Green Berets, the Sky Dragons, and the All-American 82nd Airborne. We know what 82nd Airborne Division. This is where the GIs who won the Second World War learned to pack their parachutes and push howitzers and go right into those C-47s with lots of arms and push them right out those big, beautiful doors. And wield their bayonets and pry the enemy from the hedgerows of the French. It was here in the soil that the Army forged the metal that held strong at Bastogne. It was here the mighty paratroopers earned their wings before they rained down death from above to liberate Sicily, Normandy, and even the Netherlands. That's right. Every inch of this base is steeped in the legacy of those warriors who have said with pride, "Sir, I trained at Fort Bragg, sir." That was pretty cool. And that is why we restored the historic name of this very, very special place. I don't know if it could be the same place. Fort Bragg is in, that's the name. And Fort Bragg, it shall always remain. That's never going to be happening again.
President Donald Trump, of course, referencing the name change of Fort Bragg back just a couple of years ago under the Biden administration when it was renamed Fort Liberty from Fort Bragg. The president also announcing during his visit yesterday in Fayetteville that he is working to restore names of 6 more Army bases. This is how the president described that.
For a little breaking news, we are also going to be restoring the names to Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, Fort Rucker, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, and Fort Robert E. Lee. We won a lot of battles out of those forts. It's no time to change.
This has been a big emphasis of the president throughout this administration, talking about getting back to the original names of many of the major military installations throughout the United States. Fort Bragg being one of the larger of those facilities, and announcing that while that work has not yet exactly happened, that he is working with other individuals, including the Secretary of Defense and Pete Hegseth and others, to get those original names back to the way in which they were prior to about mid-2021, when many of those names did begin to change. The president also spent some time talking about the history of the Army. As I mentioned, he was also joined by U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who rallied the supporters before the president made his appearance shortly after 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. We'll get into some additional comments from the president and Pete Hegseth coming up here in just a few minutes. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We will get a look at traffic on your Wednesday early morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks a lot, Nick. We're looking.
520, welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. A busy afternoon yesterday in the Fayetteville area as the President Donald Trump, alongside U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, addressed a crowd in celebration of the United States Army's 250th anniversary. The president making that trip down to Fayetteville yesterday afternoon and the historic Fort Bragg. Continuing our coverage of that this morning, the president talked about some more of the Army's history. Take a listen.
From the American Revolution until today, the story of the Army is the tale of an unbroken chain of American patriots who gave all they had for this country. It is the saga of epic men like Washington and Jackson, Grant and Custer, Pershing and Eisenhower, Patton and MacArthur, Wild Bill Donovan, and the great General William Yarborough, father of the Green Berets. You know that, the Green Berets? You know that? William Yarborough. It's the story of fabled units like the Old Guard, the Iron Brigade, the Big Red One, the Buffalo Soldiers, the Harlem Hellfighters, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Screaming Eagles, and George Patton's Hell on Wheels. They called it Hell on Wheels. When he was after you, it was not good. The weapons of war have changed with every generation, but the unflinching loyalty of the American soldier has always remained the same. The Army has always stayed true to its motto, "This we'll defend." You know that. This we'll defend. Army warriors who have laid down their lives for America rest by the thousands in the sacred soil of Arlington and Gettysburg, Anzio and Manila, and to far-off places known only to God. We owe everything to them. Today we renew our devotion to the cause of liberty for which they so selflessly lived and fought and so bravely died. There could be no greater tribute to their memory than to prepare the Army to dominate America's enemies for the next 250 years and more than that. That's why under the Trump administration, we're focused on restoring the spirit of the U.S. Armed Forces.
And part of restoring the spirit of the United States Armed Forces, the president also commented on recruiting numbers that he says are breaking record numbers.
After years of recruiting shortfalls, this is, to me, maybe the most exciting things. We're setting the strongest peacetime recruiting records ever. Just think of this. 6 months ago, we couldn't recruit anybody to join the military. Nobody wanted to join. That was 6 months ago. And then we had the election of November 5th. And now we have the strongest recruiting numbers in the history of our country. Can you imagine that? We've already surpassed our recruiting targets for 2025, and we're not done yet.
There from President Donald Trump as he wrapped up his comments at Fort Bragg yesterday. As I mentioned, he was also alongside U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who is leading and providing and bringing forward a lot of the changes as it relates to the United States Armed Forces. He talked about the importance of the America First agenda as it relates to the U.S. military.
This is our Commander-in-Chief, President Donald Trump, putting America first. It doesn't matter the situation, whether he's meeting with foreign leaders, we're meeting in the Oval Office, or he's talking to soldiers. He's the same leader we know and love. He's laser focused on America first, on peace through strength, and on supporting our American warfighters and vets.
And part of the efforts by not only President Trump but Secretary Hegseth is the readiness as it relates to the Department of Defense and the various branches, focusing obviously yesterday on the United States Army. Here's how Secretary Hegseth described that.
So at the Defense Department, we're doing three critical things at his direction. Number one, we're restoring the warrior ethos. We're getting back to basics. Standards, accountability, readiness, training, warfighting, lethality. We're not a college or a university. We're not interested in your woke garbage and your political correctness. We're warfighters who close with and destroy the enemy on behalf of our nation when we come home to those we love, because we don't fight because we hate what's in front of us. We fight because we love what's behind us. That's what makes the American soldier different. So we're restoring the warrior ethos back to basics. We're also rebuilding our military. We'll have the first $1 trillion budget. You will have the best equipment in your hands to stare down the enemy. From multi-billion-dollar platforms to the best rifles to the best equipment to hypersonics and drones and fighters and jets, ships and carriers. Everything you need, President Trump will make sure you have. We're rebuilding the military after 4 years of deferred maintenance.
President Donald Trump also commenting on that, telling the crowd, quote, "We've just approved our largest budget for military operations. Our army has smashed foreign empires, humbled kings, toppled tyrants, and hunted terrorist savages from the very gates of hell," as the president promised that his administration would spend about $1 trillion on national defense in the fiscal year 2026. Hegseth continued on the three pillars of the DoD's commitment to the United States Armed Forces.
And finally, we're reestablishing deterrence. Our allies know that we stand with them, and our adversaries know what we are capable of doing to them, so that we can maintain peace through strength. President Trump seeks peace. He wants peace. So do I. So do you. For our families, for our kids and our grandkids. But those who long for peace must prepare for war. And that's something the 82nd Airborne, America's 911, does every single day. So it's an absolute honor to be your 29th Secretary of Defense. You have my pledge that every single day our focus is on you and your mission and having your back.
That was essentially the tone of this comments yesterday. It was just a two-speaker event, at least during the main event itself. Started off with Secretary Hegseth, who then led into President Donald Trump, who spoke for just shy of about 55 minutes at Fort Bragg yesterday, again highlighting the Army's 250th birthday. All of this comes ahead of a military parade that is planned for this Saturday in Washington, D.C., That is to celebrate the anniversary, the birthday there. About 130 vehicles and more than 7,000 soldiers are expected to march in the parade. Fort Bragg troops and equipment will participate in the event taking place on Saturday as well. And the president seemingly thinking and continuing to push the importance of not only just the Army, but all of the branches of the United States military. He did also bring some commentary in about the ongoing situation in Los Angeles. Spent about 10 minutes on that at Fort Bragg yesterday, that getting some pretty national news coverage this morning as he discussed some of those protests, talking about liberating and sending in the National Guard and members of the Marines to assist in some of the civil unrest that's taking place out west. Well, that we will have additional coverage coming up later this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com, where you can read the latest on this event taking place at Fort Bragg yesterday. It's now 5:28. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We will get a look at the roadways on your Wednesday morning commute. A look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
536. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Wednesday morning to you. Governor Josh Stein's office has announced the creation of a new state advisory council dealing with cannabis. This coming down via executive order. The governor saying in a press release, quote, I am charging this group with studying and recommending a comprehensive approach to regulate cannabis sales. They will study best practices and learn from other states to develop a system that protects the youth, allows adult sales, ensures public safety, promotes public health, and supports North Carolina's agriculture, as well as expunging past convictions of simple THC possession and invest the revenues into resources for additional mental health and drug-driven detention. The council's formation marks the start of the Stein's administration's efforts to legalize marijuana for adults in North Carolina, while also tightening restrictions and closing loopholes that would allow access to minors. Some North Carolinians view this move positively. Others still remain skeptical. North Carolina's current policy on cannabis contains notable loopholes, one of which allows THC products into the hands of minors. THC is the active ingredient in marijuana, and it is in sale in products like Delta 8, which are legal in North Carolina, even for those under the age of 18. Washington State, notoriously permissive on its drug issues, criminalized artificial derived THC products for all ages over concerns about public health and safety of those products. North Carolina is one of 20 states that is slow to currently regulate or ban Delta 8 and Delta 9. The governor noted, quote, I want to thank members of the General Assembly for their interest in addressing this gaping loophole in state law. Let's work together on a thoughtful, comprehensive solution that allows sales to adults and that is grounded in public safety and health. The governor has been a long advocate of decriminalization for adult use, as reflected in his appointment decisions. Notably, the two Republicans appointed to the board have ties to the situation. Representative John Bell was appointed president of the hemp-producing Astrea Labs in 2023, and State Senator Bill Rabin from Brunswick County, the Republican there, has openly discussed his illegal use of marijuana on the floor of the General Assembly to cope with difficult cancer treatments. None of the Republicans who have been outspoken opponents of legalization, whether we're talking about recreational or medical use, were appointed to the board. According to John Rustin, who's the president of the North Carolina Family Policy Council, he told the Carolina Journal, one of the primary roles of government is to safeguard citizens from harm. We agree with Governor Stein that the prevalence of psychoactive and hallucinogenic drugs across the state is extremely concerning. However, the solution to the crisis is not to legalize and regulate harmful products and substances, but to protect our children, family, and communities from them. The board will be co-chaired by State Health Director Lawrence Greenblatt and Robeson County District Attorney Matt Scott. Members of the newly formed council include members of the General Assembly, members of the medical community, lawyers, officials in the Stein administration, and stakeholders in the North Carolina hemp and cannabis industry. According to John Rustin, he says North Carolina Family urges the governor and his state advisory council to honestly weigh all of the evidence and facts when considering what is the best interest of North Carolina and its people. Over the last couple of years, there has been what I'll call some pretty significant movement as it relates to cannabis reform in the North Carolina General Assembly. It seemed like about 2 years or so ago, there was some significant pressure and movement as it related to legalizing marijuana for medical uses across the state. That's when those comments from Representative Bill Rabin were made on the floor of the North Carolina House, where he talked about his use of marijuana at the time, talking about how it was the only thing that would stop it from stop the side effects of his chemo treatments, talking about some of the frustration there. Rabin, currently a survivor of a colon cancer, talked about that use and advocated heavily for it back in May of 2023. That was the last time that we saw any real serious movement on legalized marijuana use in the state of North Carolina. Since then, that legislation did not officially pass the House and the Senate during the 2023 long session. So, in fact, lawmakers would have to come back and try that again. As it stands right now, the big emphasis in the North Carolina General Assembly does continue to be the budget. The idea that anything substantial would happen, at least during the ongoing long session, seems pretty slight, as the governor has just formed this advisory council, and it could take many years for that council to come back with any sort of recommendations that lawmakers would be interested in tackling and taking up. However, as it stands right now, North Carolina is in fact in the minority as it relates to states that have gone forth with the process of legalizing marijuana for medical use. Obviously, a whole bunch of states have legalized marijuana for recreational use as well, including some of our neighbors just up in Virginia. So that continues to be a major national discussion, and that obviously will continue here in North Carolina, which is a rather interesting one. Obviously, the tobacco industry is a major form of agriculture in the state, as agriculture does continue to be the largest industry. The tobacco industry does have some major lobbying efforts in Raleigh, and many inside the state capitol have often said that is one of the larger reasons why things have not moved forward in a more expedited manner, is due to some of those lobbying efforts from various groups, specifically those in the tobacco industry. This is not something that's going to be solved or dealt with tomorrow. Likely a multi-year effort here by the governor and, again, the current makeup of the General Assembly, if they are interested in moving forward with some of this legislation to legalize cannabis or marijuana use throughout the state for very specific medical uses. We will keep an eye on the details. We do have some more information this morning, including some history as to where North Carolina has been in the past on this issue over on our website, carolinajournal.com. The headline, Stein Cannabis Council to back age 21 THC rule and adult reform. You can read those details again over on our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:43, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We'll get another look at traffic on your Wednesday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Nick, and we're looking.
And you're live.
Good morning again. It's 5:51. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Turning our attention this morning to the ongoing discussion of tariffs and trade wars across the global economy. We're focusing this morning on soybean farmers. They are set to be impacted as John Deere, one of the nation's largest manufacturers of heavy farm equipment, recently announced a major production shift to counter $500 million in tariff-related costs. John Deere has announced that it plans to reevaluate supply contracts to increase efficiencies and cost savings to offset increased costs incurred during the tariff process. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal, John Deere has reported $100 million in additional costs due to tariff in the last quarter and expects to incur an additional $400 million in tariff-related costs by the end of the fiscal year, which is in October. Kelly Lester, a policy analyst for the Center for Food, Power, and Life at the John Locke Foundation, said, quote, "Tariffs on steel and aluminum may sound like a blow against foreign industries, but the real damage is hitting farmers, food producers, and families. Equipment manufacturers like John Deere are facing over $500 million in new tariff-related costs, and despite their best efforts, they may have no choice but to pass those costs on to the consumer. This comes at a time when farmers are facing depressed crop prices and high input costs. For North Carolina soybean growers who have relied heavily on advanced machinery and global exports markets, this pressure is especially real." This follows another recent blow to agriculture and the soybean industry as China recently cut all imports of soybeans from the United States. As the number one buyer of U.S. soybeans, China's cuts dramatically impacted the agriculture industry in North Carolina. China accounts for 48% of U.S. soybean exports, and in 2022, North Carolina exported, listen to this, $446 million worth of soybeans, a lot of that going to China, nearly a $500 million industry, according to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Charles Hall, the executive director of the North Carolina Soybean Producers Association, said, quote, "Due to the 25% retaliatory tariffs imposed on the United States by China in 2016, the U.S. soybean industry did lose market share in China to Brazil and has not yet fully recovered. Brazil has been incentivized to compete with the United States for the Chinese market, and this competition is manifested in logistics and infrastructure investments in both nations." According to data from the National Oilseed Producers Association, the soybean production industry in North Carolina was valued at more than $2.9 billion and accounted for more than 4,900 jobs. Those numbers are based on data collected between October of 2018 and September of 2021. More commentary from the Charles Hall. He said, quote, "We've long recognized the need to diversify our global markets, and that's why we've done our share of work to help develop markets like Vietnam and Thailand, where U.S. soy is in demand. Our best customers are right here in our backyard, however. North Carolina's amazing animal protein industry. Hogs and chickens are the number one customers for protein meal made from NC soybeans. We're always mindful that our customers know and appreciate the value of a reliable supply of high-quality North Carolina soybeans." The United States Department of Agriculture reported that approximately 1.63 million acres of the product were harvested in North Carolina in 2023. That's down a couple 100,000 from 2022. And as it stands right now, soybean is the fifth in cash crop receipts in North Carolina and accounts for about 5.7% of cash receipts in North Carolina in 2023. Dr. Jeffrey Dorfman, a professor and extension economist at the North Carolina at NC State University, said, quote, soybean farmers in North Carolina are less resilient on exports than soybean growers in most other states, thanks to the large number of animals raised in this state that eat soybean as part of their feed. However, the state's farmers can still export a sizable share of their crop. In addition, market prices for domestic users are impacted by quality exports and world prices. So the trade situation is important to all commodity farmers, not just soybeans. In 2022, more than 5,600 farms produced soybeans across all 100 counties, but prominently in the Piedmont and Coastal Plains region, according to information provided to Carolina Journal. Most soybean farmers also grow other crops such as corn, cotton, tobacco, and sweet potatoes. It is one of the very diverse crops that is grown here across the state of North Carolina. As we continue our coverage this morning on the tariff impacts and the trade wars that continue to exist within the United States economy, continuing to focus on the major agricultural impact here in North Carolina. As we look at some of those details this morning, eyeing in on soybeans, not only from the impacts of direct trade with China and some of the closeouts in that market, but some of the very specialized and very expensive equipment that is used in those farms from companies like John Deere that are trying to figure out how to cope with some of those tariff pressures as well. We've got more details this morning. It's over on our website, carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.